So when I was 12 years old in middle school, I got an assignment, a rather intriguing assignment. And the assignment was write an essay that's a sermon from the point of view of your religion. Well, you would think that the future Rebbitzin would ace that, right? However, I knew nothing about my religion. We were secular Jews. We lit candles at Hanukkah. We had a Seder at my grandparents' in Hebrew and drank a lot of grape juice. And I really didn't know anything about the content or the meaning of Judaism. So I asked my mom, and she didn't know a whole lot either, but she referred me to a friend who was more observant. And from that friend, I gleaned enough to write what I thought was a really killer essay sermon. And I talked about in my essay about how in Judaism it's not about salvation, it's not about the afterlife, heaven or hell, it's all about what we do on earth that makes a difference. I turned it in, and I got a C. Well, I know, I didn't get many C's, but that was one I'll never forget. And I've been kind of trying to upgrade from that ever since, right? So, and I have a built-in mechanism at home. I can learn a lot about Judaism from David. And I also like to learn from ancient sources, from the ancestors. So where do you go to learn to talk to the ancestors? You go to the cemetery. And this year I was one of the women with Cerise who walked around and measured and prayed and so on and made these beautiful candles. And it's kind of easier to talk to the ancestors when you're at the cemetery, but also when you have goddesses singing and chanting with you, it kind of invokes the spirits. But I'm familiar with that cemetery, Scenic Hills Cemetery. I'm kind of a frequent flyer. I like to walk up in the cemetery. I like to hike there. It is Scenic Hills. It's a beautiful walk. And while I'm there, I know the names on the stones. I know all these people. And sometimes I walk around and I pull a few weeds. I do a little tshuva. I say I'm sorry to the people that I didn't say I was sorry to when they were alive. I kind of know that neighborhood. It's very familiar. We've actually purchased real estate in that neighborhood. It's my future neighborhood, right? So since it's high holy days and the veils are thinner and so on, I go there frequently and I talk to the ancestors. And since I'm a storyteller, apparently not a good sermonizer, but a storyteller, I asked, what story should I tell for high holy days? And this is, for Yom Kippur actually, this is the one they recommended. And I resisted it at first, as usual, but then I kind of tempered that resistance and softened into it, and this is the story. Once, there was a woman who was seeking justice. She had read the words, "Justice shall you pursue," and she took it seriously. And she traveled all over the world looking for justice. And what is justice? She was looking for what that was. She was looking for, is it fairness? Is it equality? What is justice? And one day, she traveled all over and really found no answers, but one day she was walking through an open field. And if you're in a Jewish story and you're walking through an open field, something is going to happen. And all of a sudden, there appeared before her a cottage that she hadn't seen before. And there was light emanating from the windows. And the closer she got, the more it looked like candlelight. And she walked up and she knocked on the door, but no one answered. So she knocked again, and again, no answer. So she decided to take a chance, and she opened the door, and she walked inside. And as soon as she got inside, she could see that this cottage was way bigger on the inside than it looked on the outside. There were rooms and hallways and more rooms. It was kind of infinite. And in every room there were shelves. And on those shelves there were candles, oil candles, that were burning. Some of them were in very ornate containers, and some of them were plain. Some of them were full of oil and burning brightly, and some of them were very dim and kind of flickering, very low on oil. And all of a sudden, she saw an old man, and he walked up to her and he said, "May I help you?" And she said, "Well, I've been looking for justice, and I found myself here. What is this place?" And he said, "This is the house of souls. Every one of these candles represents a human soul." And she said, "You mean there's a candle in here for every single person?" And he said, "Exactly." She said, does that mean there's a candle for me?" And he nodded. And she said, "Well, could you show me that candle?" And again, he nodded. And he led her back all the way through all the rooms and hallways to a room in the back. And he pointed to a candle on the shelf. And the oil in that candle was very low. And the wick was sputtering as if it was going to go out. And she stared at that candle, and she looked around, and the old man had disappeared. And there she stood in front of her candle, and then she noticed that right next to it, there was another candle that was full of oil. In fact, it looked like it had too much oil. And before she knew it, she had reached out and she picked up that candle that was full of oil, and she picked it up right next to hers, and she was just about to tip it when suddenly the man appeared and he said, "What are you doing?" And she stopped and he said, "Is this the justice you are seeking?" And then the man disappeared. The cottage disappeared. And the woman was standing again in that open field, and she was listening to the trees, to the wind whispering her destiny. Now you can imagine why I resisted that story. It doesn't have a happy ending. And we don't like to talk about death, but we all know that death is an equal opportunity employer. We have that in common. We are all going to die. And we can't necessarily change our expiration date. I mean, we can do some things to make our body more healthy or less healthy, but we can't really change that time when we're going to die. We can't know it necessarily, and we can't change it. We can't really take somebody else's candle and pour it into ours, and we can't do the opposite. We can't take our oil and pour it into someone else's candle. I would have loved to, when my mother died at 52 years old, I would have loved to have given her some of my oil, and we all would, right? But we can't change that. Death is what it is. We all are going to die. We can't change that. But I have learned a little more about Judaism, and there are some things that we can change. We have some mechanisms built in. Tomorrow, on Yom Kippur Day, just before the Amidah, we're going to chant the Unatana Tokef prayer. And that's the one, you all know it. It's the one where we chant, on Rosh Hashanah it is written, right? B'yom Som Kippur, B'yom Som Kippur. On Yom Kippur it is sealed. And then it lists who will die, who will live, who by fire, who by water, and all of that. But on Rosh Hashanah it is written, on Yom Kippur it is sealed. We have a little wiggle room in there. And when we get further into that prayer, there's the mechanism right there that I should have known when I was 12 years old. I might have gotten an A. That's the part in the prayer where we chant, Ooh, Teshuvah. Do you know that? Sing it with me. Ooh, Teshuvah, ooh, Tefillah, ooh, Tzedakah. So that's Teshuvah, forgiveness, Tefillah, prayer, Tzedakah, giving. And what does it say about them? They temper the severity of the decree. Temper, what does that mean? Maybe modify. I like to think of it as soften. We can soften the decree. Here, when the veils are thinner at High Holy Days on Yom Kippur, we soften into prayer. We can talk to our ancestors. We soften into tzedakah. We can do giving. And that's our way of making some justice in the world. We can see what is needed, and we can give from our hearts. We can give from our pocketbooks. We can make some justice with tzedakah. And then most important, on Yom Kippur, we do shuvah. We forgive others that have hurt us. We take those stones of unforgiveness from our heart and we soften. We let them go. And we forgive ourselves. And that's how we make tshuva and we make peace in the world. And with those three mechanisms that I never knew about before, this is how together we create the justice that we seek. If I had known then when I was 12 years old, I probably would have gotten an A. Good Yom Tov.